From the high craggy peaks of Coldwater and Mount Margaret, down Windy and Norway Pass to the Green and Toutle rivers, from as far north as Goat and Black Mountain, down Harmony Falls to the shores of Spirit Lake, Bear Cove, and Duck Bay, the towering giants came crashing down. Mountain hemlock and noble fir, western red cedar, Douglas, and Pacific silver fir, the backbones of an untouched evergreen forest, their mighty trunks snapped like toothpicks beneath a searing cloud of blackened ash. These are the charred, broken skeletons of a 600-year-old forest, a reminder of the awesome power that Mount St. Helens unleashed in just a few perilous minutes. Where lush green forests and a snow-capped volcano once sparked our imagination, now a gaping crater and lifeless moonscape stir an overwhelming sense of awe. Because so much of the country stands bare, dressed only in monotones of brown and gray, all color and life linger before the eye. A splash of red and yellow, purple and green, the song of a bird, or the track of an elk dispel any feeling that the land is empty. But to biologists who came to Mount St. Helens soon after the eruption, it was lifeless and empty. What had not been swept away by the eruption's hurricane-force winds was now buried beneath a layer of ash. To their astonishment, scientists soon discovered that the process of recovery began even before the hot debris had time to cool. For beneath the layer of sterile ash, plants and animals had survived the eruption's fury. Today, these survivors play an essential but unforeseen role in speeding the natural recovery of the land. For scientists, the landscape is a giant stage constructed for them to watch the unfolding drama of life returning to the volcano. It is a stage for all ages to observe how nature heals itself amidst such destruction. The balance between life and death has tipped back and forth ever since the first eruption of Mount St. Helens some 40,000 years ago. Lava and ash that engulf a forest eventually become carpeted with new trees. It is a scene that is played thousands of times in the Cascade Range as one volcano after another burst into fiery eruption. Which way the balance will tip in the future depends on Mount St. Helens. Plants are gaining a temporary foothold. Animals are returning, and so are the people. But how soon will another searing cloud of pumice and ash sweep down the volcano's flanks? Perhaps none are more deeply concerned by this question than the geologists who have worked in the crater since 1980, searching for clues that might reveal the volcano's next move. Just as we scrutinize life's struggle to survive in the shadow of the volcano, we are confronted with our own struggle to provide enough warning before Mount St. Helens unleashes its fury again. The gaping crater is little more than a shell of its former grandeur. Nothing is stable here, least of all the huge lava dome growing from its center. Giant boulders litter the ground, released from the crumbling crater walls by a warm noonday sun, or sent crashing down the dome by an advancing lava flow. Born of fire, it is an eerie and formidable place. Until the eruption of Mount St. Helens, few active volcanoes with such explosive behavior could be studied so closely or as frequently. Day after day, week after week, geologists probe the volcano with sensitive instruments, monitoring its vital signs like doctors diagnosing a patient. Each new eruption becomes a test case, revealing old and sometimes new symptoms, which hint that an eruption is brewing. This team of scientists from the United States Geological Survey have probably assembled one of the best early warning systems that exist on any volcano in the world. Warnings have been issued for all but 2 of the nearly 24 eruptions since 1980. But as that fateful Sunday morning reminds us, expected or not, eruptions with far-reaching consequences can occur at any time. 7 years after the eruption, people living downstream from the volcano are still trying to undo the consequences of the May 18, 1980 eruption. In towns like Longview, Kelso, and Castle Rock, 55 miles from the volcano, floods and mud flows continue to threaten more than 75,000 people with mud and debris. The Toutle River Valley has been ravaged by giant mudflows for thousands of years. Here, the power of man is pitted against the power of a volcano, as men and machines try to prevent nature from repeating itself. The cause for concern is not the volcano. It is the 3.5 billion cubic yards of loose volcanic rock that slid into the North Fork Toutle River during the first few minutes of the eruption. A mountain of debris 15 miles long and as deep as 600 feet. This is the eruption's legacy. It has been a long and difficult struggle, but 7 years and nearly $500 million later, Longview and the other communities are safe. No flooding has occurred. But for those who remember Mount St. Helens as a tranquil and peaceful mountain, it has come at a painfully high price. Mount St. Helens stood apart from the older, more weathered peaks of the Cascades because of its youthful symmetry. Glistening white in every season, its very beauty deceived thousands through the years who gave it their hearts. Climbers and hikers, photographers and artists, and even a lifetime friend, Harry Truman. He had spent 50 of his 84 years living in the shadow of the mountain. In 1909, the first group of YMCA campers trekked to the shores of Spirit Lake. It was a grueling 3-day trip in the early years. The boys walked while their baggage rode. In the 1920s, boys headed for summer camp departed from Portland in an open lorry. Over the years, Spirit Lake became the hub of summer activities for families and children. Between the Forest Service and YMCA, Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, Harmony Falls Resort, and Truman's Lodge, nearly a half-dozen camps ring the lake. Summertime erupted with the roar of laughing and screaming campers. The list of activities was endless. Whether rolling logs or playing volleyball. Learning how to plant trees or fight fires. Playing pranks or telling stories at the evening campfire. Thousands shared their youth with Mount St. Helens. The backcountry around Mount Margaret was a backpacking paradise, luring hikers with its wild beauty and lush alpine meadows. New and surprising sights were always just around the next bend in the trail, and even more exotic over the next ridge. Mountain lakes lay like sparkling jewels amidst one of the largest remaining stands of old-growth Douglas fir in the Cascades. Beneath these towering giants, the delicate trillium and dogwood bunchberry grew, and elk, deer, and black bears took shelter. A herd of mountain goats was introduced into the backcountry in 1972 by the state of Washington's game department. They were usually friendly, but during rutting season, more than one hiker had to climb a tree to escape the horns of the dominant and belligerent male. Without prodding from a stubborn mountain goat, thousands climbed Mount St. Helens every year, second in number only to neighboring Mount Hood. The initial ascent of Mount St. Helens was made in 1853. For more than a century after, the magnetic appeal of its looming peak drew mountaineers up the long white slopes. In the early days, seeing the fire lookout meant that you were almost at the top, and with luck, might be served hot coffee and homemade donuts by the amiable host. Coffee or not, everyone was treated with stupendous views of the other Cascade giants that rose like icebergs above an ocean, each valley a wave that rolled on as far as the eye could see. But stretching beneath the green depths of the forest were dangerous signs that led back to the ice cap of Mount St. Helens. They are signs followed by geologists. Layers of ash and lava flows, blocks of pumice and pieces of burned wood, signs that point to a dangerous volcano. Geologist Don Molyneux of the United States Geological Survey studied these layers to piece together the life history of Mount St. Helens. He found a history marked by violent and explosive behavior. Stacked like layers in a cake, these deposits were the key to understanding the volcano's history. Pieces of charcoal indicating temperatures as high as 500 degrees Fahrenheit, as well as blocks of pumice embedded in ash, indicate that this deposit was moving very fast, perhaps 100 miles per hour, as it spread away from the volcano. Areas less than 5 miles from the mountain are buried with many different layers of pumice and ash as deep as 15 feet. One layer is about 3,500 years old and can be traced into Alberta, Canada. By mapping the kinds of volcanic rocks erupted by Mount St. Helens and estimating their ages, Molyneux was able to determine that the volcano had been highly explosive and was roughly 10 times more active than the other Cascade volcanoes during the past 5,000 years. He and his colleague, Dwight Crandall, summarized their findings in a 1978 hazard report. They concluded that the volcano's behavior pattern suggests that the current quiet interval will not last as long as 1,000 years. Instead, an eruption is more likely to occur within the next 100 years, and perhaps even before the end of this century. Scientists like Molyneux were counting on the volcano to behave in much the same way as it had in the past. But for thousands who gave their hearts to Mount St. Helens, a veil of beauty continued to hide its violent and restless nature. In the spring of 1980, after more than 100 years of silence, the slumbering volcano began to stir. Mount St. Helens was about to wake up. A moderate-sized earthquake measuring 4.2 on the Richter scale shook Mount St. Helens March 20th. Although scientists had located dozens of quakes beneath the volcano, it was the largest ever recorded at the mountain. And the fact that it occurred just below the surface and was followed by dozens of aftershocks made it even more unusual. The swarm of earthquakes increased dramatically March 25th. 24 quakes greater than magnitude 4 occurred in only 8 hours, 5 in less than 1 hour. All doubts about the potential for volcanic activity were abruptly removed 2 days later.
We're flying near the volcano and we can see ash and steam pouring from the top of the mountain. Huge chunks of ice and rock are being tossed into the air. Ash is exploding hundreds of feet above the summit and turning the volcano dirty black.
The volcano's crown of ice was fast becoming marred by severe changes. Powerful eruptions of superheated steam blasted a crater 200 feet wide through the ice cap. As hundreds of earthquakes continued to shake the mountain, two giant crack systems broke across the entire summit area on both sides of the crater, an ominous warning of the volcano's growing instability. More steam blasts carved a second crater that quickly merged with the first. By early April, the cauldron had grown 1,500 feet across. Between the cracks, the whole summit area dropped at least 200 feet, forming huge cliffs. Hundreds of new fractures pierced the ice daily. Geologists quickly determined that the ash was composed only of shattered pieces of rock from the volcano. The rocks were pulverized by the tremendous jetting action caused as hot water suddenly flashes to steam. For now at least, scientists knew that fresh molten rock had not yet forced its way high into the volcano. But even as the volcano was giving notice that its slumbering days were over, some refused to believe the destructive potential of its hidden power.
What do you think is going to happen?
Well, the geologist says the big one hasn't come yet. But it hasn't hurt anything yet. It's no damage. It's on our side, the north side. It's left me alone entirely. I'm on the northeast side. There's no rock, no ash, or nothing on my side. If there's anything that's coming into the Ape Canyon and the plains of Abraham, if there's any slide at all. But our side of the mountain shows no rock, no lava, or not a thing coming down on our side. If anything is coming down, it's coming on the south side or the east side, in the plains of Abraham and Ape Canyon, if it's doing anything there. But so far, it's done no damage, and it don't look bad to me.
So how long are you going to stay around here?
I prophesied all along that I thought it'd run, of course, this morning, but I was wrong. I thought we'd got through then. But I can't see where it's going to do any damage, not to our side at all. And if it does any damage, it's going to do it to the east side of the mountain.
What are you going to do?
What am I going to do? I lived up there. I lived up there 50 years. I had some people yesterday ask me why the hell I stay there and what am I doing up there. That's my life. Spirit Lake and Mount St. Helens is my life, folks. I've lived there 50 years. It's a part of me. That mountain and that lake is a part of Truman, and I'm a part of it. I wouldn't leave. They couldn't drag me out of the 10-mule team. I'm brave about the mountain. I couldn't understand how in the world the mountain could ever get me in Spirit Lake. I don't think it can.
Harry Truman never left his beloved mountain. While Harry placed trust in his longtime neighbor, scientists were taking few chances as they wired the volcano with instruments. Changes in ground elevation were measured. Seismometers were installed to better record earthquakes. Gravity and magnetic field surveys were conducted in hopes they might reveal the volcano's next move. But as the volcano settled into a pattern of occasional steam bursts and hundreds of daily quakes, geologists were hard-pressed to make any predictions. The spectacle of an erupting volcano drew thousands of sightseers eager for a closer view. Some even christened the volcano Old Shake and Bake. Viewed from the south, it was still easy to believe in the innocence of its graceful cone. On the north side, however, an ominous bulge was taking on sinister proportions. By making detailed maps from aerial photographs, the magnitude of this outward movement became obvious. A part of the north flank, 1 mile long and 1/2 mile wide, was now more than 300 feet higher than it was only 1 year ago. Never before had such a large growing bulge been observed on an active volcano. But what was causing the bulge? Using electronic distance meters to measure the bulge, scientists discovered that it was growing about 5 feet a day. The volcano was being wedged apart by molten rock as it moved higher and higher into the cone. Given the extent of the bulge, a new warning was issued. If triggered by an earthquake or eruption, a large avalanche of snow, ice, and rock could reach Spirit Lake and cause mud flows in the Toutle River Valley. Despite such warnings, geologists could not be certain just how large such an avalanche would be or how it might be triggered.
How much farther can it go without gravity taking over?
Well, we don't know. And mainly because we don't know the strength of the rock and we don't really know the structure specifically within the volcano. And people can make very good analysis of how steep a slope has to be if they know what the materials are and the strength of those materials. But we don't know that with the volcano. So we don't know if we're very close to slides at this point or whether we're not close. And another critical thing that we do not know is whether or not it would go all in one grand motion or whether it would go in many small rock falls and avalanches.
For weeks, people had demanded access to their property inside a restricted zone established by the state of Washington.
Governor Ray's position on this is that she wants to be of some assistance to the property owners and let you go in and at your own risk and take care of whatever you have to take care of. And she's directed us to be allowed to deviate from the executive order for the purpose of allowing some of the property owners to go in, and we've been directed to assist you in doing that. And so what our plan is to go up to the first gate, and you will be asked to sign waivers, though, because it's an area that's dangerous. Nobody's really supposed to be in there, and you're going to have to sign a waiver holding the state and counties harmless, and then we will, under police escort, take you in, and we will bring you out.
And the driver license is fine. It's going by convoy.
Everyone was required to sign liability waivers and agree to be out by sundown.
No, just the driver.
Geologist Dave Johnston arrived a day early at the United States Geological Survey's observation site to take over measuring the bulge. He was 6 miles northwest of the mountain.
Vancouver, this is Johnston. Surveys show no change in the bulge today. Repeat, no change.
Yeah, Dave, that agrees well here. We see no change in the earthquake count either. Vancouver, clear.
the exploding inferno turned the volcano's mantle of snow and ice into raging torrents of mud and debris. Mud flows poured down river valleys, ripping trees from their roots and engulfing everything in their paths. In the South Fork Toutle River, thousands of logs swept from a lumber yard surged downriver. In less than 3 hours, the mud flow peaked 21 feet high. As mud flows raced far beyond the volcano, a plume of ash thrust 12 miles into the sky. Blown eastward by strong winds, the gritty cloud cast an eerie darkness across Washington. Like a dry winter snow, the ash covered everything. Thousands of travelers became stranded. City streetlights came on. As the volcano roared on, 540 million tons of ash fell over an area of more than 22,000 square miles. In 2 weeks, some of the ash would circle the earth. As the day came to an end, the enormity of the eruption became clear to all who had doubted the volcano's power. Even scientists familiar with the volcano were overwhelmed by the day's events. In the words of one geologist who flew around the volcano during the day,
"My feelings involved a complex mixture of awe, frustration, and sadness. Awe at the immensity of the eruption, frustration in not being able to get closer to it, and sadness at the almost certain deaths of Dave Johnston and Harry Truman and many others."
A 1,000 desperate acts of search and salvation would have to wait another day. With so much of the land lifeless and desolate, it is hard to comprehend the energy released by the volcano. Why did it blast hot debris across the land instead of skyward? What finally triggered the eruption? Within seconds of a magnitude 5 earthquake, the entire north flank of the mountain fell apart in a colossal avalanche. Explosions ripped through the sliding debris and quickly formed a blast of ash, rock, and gas that swept as fast as 300 miles an hour across the land. With more than 1,000 feet of its summit gone, the volcano was like a giant pressure cooker suddenly unleashed. The only warnings to loggers and campers, unable to see the rolling cloud coming toward them, were faint rumbling noises and a burst of wind. When escape became impossible, they sought shelter beneath logs and behind trees. Even as hundreds of trees fell around them, they heard nothing. Survivors describe being hit first by mud and ice, but within seconds, it became extremely hot. Hundreds of small fires started, and plastic on vehicles melted as temperatures reached 600 degrees Fahrenheit. 57 people were reported dead or missing. Mud flows had followed the historical pattern, but the blast damage exceeded Crandall and Molyneux's predictions. In high-altitude infrared photographs taken by NASA before the eruption, green vegetation appears dark red. After the eruption, all life is absent, far beyond what was considered the danger zone. An estimate of wildlife killed included 11 million fish, 27,000 grouse, 11,000 hares, 5,200 elk, 1,400 coyotes, 600 black-tailed deer, 300 bobcats, 200 black bear, 15 mountain lions, and the herd of 15 mountain goats. Mount St. Helens has remained intermittently active. At least 15 lesser eruptions have occurred since the cataclysmic event. The question remains, will another explosive eruption comparable to that of May 18, 1980, take place before it returns to a dormant state? Long after the sun disappeared from the sky on that fateful day, the volcano's shadow continued to spread uncertainty across the Northwest. But after weeks of digging out from beneath tons of ash and mud, people began to appreciate that the stark beauty of Mount St. Helens was a monument to both the destructive and healing powers of nature. Congress set aside 110,000 acres in 1982 as a national volcanic monument to be managed by the Forest Service for the purpose of scientific research, education, and recreation. The Mount St. Helens Visitor Center provides an excellent introduction to the volcano. Exhibits and audiovisual programs interpret the geologic, biologic, and cultural history of the area. The Pacific Northwest National Parks and Forests Association is an educational, nonprofit organization created to benefit visitors to national parks and national forests of the Northwest. Supporting the management and interpretive programs, it serves visitors through the publication and sale of interpretive literature. Recreational and education facilities offer an invitation to explore, enjoy, and learn from one of nature's most dynamic places. A variety of walks, talks, and programs are conducted by the interpretive naturalists throughout the monument. For a generation that remembers the events of May 18th, the plants and animals surviving in this barren land are living testimony to the healing power of nature. But another generation waits and wonders, when will the volcano erupt again? Geologist Don Swanson of the Cascades Volcano Observatory in Vancouver, Washington, has been monitoring the daily activity of Mount St. Helens since 1980.
Probably the biggest opportunity the volcano has presented to us is the opportunity to devise and test methods for predicting eruptions. We do that in the crater, and in fact most of the measurements are made right on the lava dome. The dome is really just the upper part of the system of molten rock that extends down to great depths into the Earth's surface. And by measuring the movements on the lava dome, we have learned that the dome begins to swell before eruptions, and this allows us to predict them.
The huge mound-shaped pile of lava growing in the crater is one of the Earth's youngest features. Standing nearly 1,000 feet tall, more than a dozen eruptions have built this volcano within a volcano. Lava domes are built by thick, pasty masses of lava that are too sticky to flow very far from the vent. Consequently, lava piles up into a dome-shaped feature that resembles a giant muffin. This dome in 1980 was affectionately named Muffy by geologists. Lava of the Mount St. Helens dome is about 1 million times thicker than the fluid lavas erupted from Kilauea volcano in Hawaii. The lava is stickier because it contains more silica, the basic building block of volcanic rocks. Each succeeding eruption forced magma up into Muffy's molten core and onto its surface. After several weeks or months of quiet, another episode added yet another lava flow to the top of Muffy. In this way, the dome resembles a giant stack of lava pancakes, each 100 feet thick and 1,000 feet across. But geologists cannot actually see a batch of magma rising into the dome. They can only see changes occurring on its surface. They must use sensitive instruments that can detect increasing pressure and stresses caused by magma moving beneath the volcano. Tilting or warping of the ground is caused by magma rising toward the surface of the dome. A specially designed radio transmitter relays data every 5 minutes to a computer at the observatory. Swanson routinely monitors surface changes on the dome.
Most people think that the ground is very stable beneath their feet. On the dome, everything moves a lot. We found by placing reflectors around on the dome's surface and then measuring distances between them that the dome is constantly moving. And we find that the pattern of changes in distances that we measure helps us predict eruptions.
Swanson and his colleagues measure the distance between the reflector targets each time they visit the crater.
When we first start measuring changes on the dome, say 2 or 3 weeks before an eruption, we see very small changes, just a fraction of an inch per day. Then as the time toward the next eruption becomes smaller, these rates increase up to the point where just a day or two before the eruption, we may be seeing changes as much as 100 feet per day. And it's by plotting these changes against time that we can determine when the next eruption will take place.
These techniques are used in combination with a study of earthquakes occurring beneath the volcano to predict eruptions. As magma makes room for itself during its upward journey, it fractures the overlying rocks, causing earthquakes. Seismologist Chris Jernians-Trisler at the University of Washington Geophysics Laboratory in Seattle, Washington, analyzes thousands of earthquakes that shake the volcano each year.
Well, what's so remarkable about earthquake activity at Mount St. Helens is that we see a very regular pattern prior to each dome-building eruption. The pattern is that we see a striking increase in the number of earthquakes leading up to the eruption. These records here are from the 1986 eruption and show this pattern very well. For example, roughly 2 weeks before the eruption, this day's records show maybe several earthquakes in a day's time. As we move closer to the eruption, earthquake activity increases so that we have many earthquakes per minute and we can barely count them.
Most of the earthquakes are less than a magnitude 2 on the Richter scale and can be felt only in the crater. But by determining the size and location of earthquakes occurring beneath the volcano each day, scientists have learned to recognize a pattern in the quakes that leads to an eruption.
Even though we've seen this pattern so many times in the past, we have to be careful not to be too overconfident in our ability to provide warning. The pattern itself could change at any time.
Mount St. Helens is now one of the most predictable volcanoes in the world. If the volcano is so predictable, why couldn't the events of May 18, 1980 be foreseen as well?
All of the prediction that we made since 1980 have been based on a general pattern of earthquake and ground movement of the dome. And these patterns are faithfully reflected each time prior to the event. Before the May 18th event, there was no such pattern to go on. And so that we could not predict the enormous event that occurred then, even in hindsight.
Though geologists warned before May 18th that explosive activity was certain to occur, the timing and magnitude of the blast could not be predicted. But if a bulge is discovered to be growing on another volcano, geologists can use this experience to warn others of a similar eruption. Disastrous though it was, the May 18th experience is certain to save hundreds of lives on some distant volcano in the future. Before nightfall descends on the volcano, geologists leave for home and visitors search for greener and more familiar ground. But here in the shadow of Mount St. Helens, others take refuge where they can. There is a striking abundance of living things that manage to survive in a land with so little food and shelter. Understanding the story of life on the volcano is more difficult than scientists envisioned. By making detailed surveys of plants and animals each summer, Dr. Jim McMahon of Utah State University pieces together life's new beginning.
Two things have really surprised biologists working here since 1980. First, we thought we would be able to typify areas that we were studying as simply blast, blowdown, or high tephra fall. It turned out to be a lot more complex than that once we got on the sites, because the events that occurred on the day of the first explosion and the subsequent ones form an absolutely complex mosaic where every patch of ground has been treated quite differently. The The second really interesting thing is the fact that when we got here in 1980, it looked so devastated that it was hard to believe anything had survived. But in fact, after carefully scrutinizing the area, a lot of organisms had survived in different kinds of places. And what this means is that the volcano is composed of a mosaic of surviving organisms that will spread out from those points of survival and fill in the whole area rather than filling in only from the edges.
In one of the great paradoxes of nature, the dominant and stately conifers were helpless against the volcano. With their lofty crowns of branches and needles acting like sails, the giant trees caught the full force of the blast. Only the smaller shade-tolerant plants, or those with growing structures below ground, survived the eruption. In eerie silence, a ghost forest stands watch over a generation destined to become the new giants. When the volcano erupted, a lingering snowpack still covered much of the area. By insulating these plants from the heat and protecting them from the abrasive effects of the blast, snow cover ensured that some would survive. Downwind of the volcano, biologists feared the worst for millions of trees coated with ash. The cement-like blanket of ash not only prevented photosynthesis by blocking sunlight, it also increased needle temperatures by as much as 30 degrees. But since the eruption occurred in spring, billions of tiny buds had not yet broken for the season. So within weeks, a generation of tender shoots burst forth in a dazzling display of green. Fresh needles convert sunlight to usable forms of energy more efficiently than old ones. As more and more young needles formed and old ones dropped to the ground, some trees actually grew at a faster rate than before. If the eruption had occurred just a few weeks later, perhaps some of these same trees would instead be dead. The need for reforestation, a significant feature of the Forest Service's management program, was immediately created by the eruption. Out of 150,000 devastated acres, approximately 13,000 outside the legal boundaries of Mount St. Helens National Volcanic Monument were considered for reforestation. However, silviculturists were confronted with a drastically modified environment above and below ground. The new soil profile laid in place is explained by Gene Slonaker.
After the eruption, we faced some different things than we'd ever run into before. After all, this volcanic activity had lain down anywhere from 6 inches to 2 or 3 feet worth of new material on top of everything else that was there before. To illustrate that, let me show you in this hole that we've dug, just for your information. Looking down at the bottom here, this light brown layer is the old soil that was there before. And that's where most of the moisture and organic material is. Next up from that is light gray, looks like gray beach sand almost. And it's particles, broken up rock particles that came out first from the effect of the actual blast itself. At a later point in time, not much later really, only a few minutes, why that part of it was all done, and some of the true volcanic material was ejected from the mountain. This in terms of ash and pumice. The pumice being really light, just rock injected with air as part of the eruption process. On the top of all the rest of this, you had a crust. And this is crusty only because it was a little finer. It's kind of like silk comparison to sand or something coarser than that. And it was on top because it went higher into the air and came down last on top of everything else. This material on top of that is just material that has been washed in over time since the eruption actually happened.
The factors associated with the soil were a shortage of moisture due to the low water holding capacity of volcanic material, a shortage of nutrients in the fresh ground rock, and light and heat reflection from the light-colored ash. Surface temperatures in excess of 60 degrees centigrade were measured. Such temperatures can cause death of seedlings or moisture stress through excessive transpiration. Test plots utilizing experimental practices were established to determine which species would grow well under these conditions. The result is a successful overall survival rate of 80%. Plants growing on hillsides facing away from the volcano in the lee of the blast were the most likely to survive. Here, the scouring action of the blast did little to disturb the forest cover as it surged up and over the ridgetop. Few plants survived on the side of the ridge that faces the volcano directly. But by far the most extensive plant cover today is found in areas that were cleared of timber before the eruption.
One really interesting contrast in how vegetation has returned to the volcano has to do with the difference between areas that had been clear-cut versus those that were forested just before the volcano erupted. Areas that had been clear-cut had plants in them that were adapted to being in bright, sunlit, open areas with high temperatures, whereas the forested areas had plants that needed a lot of shade. A good example of a plant that does well in such a situation is this plant, fireweed. It can occur in almost any kind of disturbance. And another one is this one, Pearly Everlasting. Both of these species have seeds that can move very rapidly, so not only did they occur in the clear-cut areas, but as you look across the entire volcano now, it's virtually is one big clear-cut, and so they occur everywhere.
The bracken fern has a stem that grows underground. It helps to keep the plant from drying out and to spread rapidly through an area. But living through the blast or having efficient means of dispersal is no guarantee that a plant will continue to survive. Not only does it have to deal with drought and the burning rays of the sun, but also elk and deer and the busy northern pocket gopher foraging for food. Because they live in underground burrows, small mammals like the gopher are perfectly suited for surviving eruptions. But very little is known about how their activities may alter the recovery of plants above ground. Dr. McMahon believes that a true picture of the recovery story will emerge only by including a study of burrowing mammals. McMahon and his colleagues place live traps, baited with peanut butter and rolled oats, in areas that appear favorable for the continued survival of mammals. Even though this site is less than 2 miles from the crater, the surviving vegetation is a good sign that mammals reside below ground. A surprising number of species, including the deer mouse, were observed within 2 years of the eruption. After an animal is identified and examined for its sex, age, and signs of having produced offspring, it is set free. It is the pocket gopher, however, that is most helpful to plants.
One kind of spore that gopher digging brings to the surface is the spore of a fungus that infects the roots of plants, and the root plus the fungus is called a mycorrhiza. The significance of this is that these mycorrhizae allow plants to take water and phosphorus up more effectively when they're infected by the fungus than when the fungus isn't there. More than 95% of the plants throughout the world have this kind of association. And here at Mount St. Helens, some of the initial plants that did established on soil handled by gophers, and they got the extra advantage that that soil contained the spores of the fungus. They became infected, and they were able to get water and phosphorus more easily.
But even the gopher's excavations cannot compare to the erosive action of running water. Flowing down hillsides into rills and gullies, water carries away the loose blast deposits, sometimes cutting down to the old soil layer where plants and seeds lay entombed. Uncovered as late as 3 years after the eruption, they were still able to grow and germinate. Thousands of gullies lined with life challenge the commonly held belief that erosion is detrimental to plants. Where erosion cannot remove ash and pumice because of a thick tangle of downed trees, recovery of the land will be much slower. If fresh volcanic deposits contain so few nutrients, how do plants colonize an area that is buried with layers of ash and pumice tens of feet thick? At the base of the volcano, a broad area known as the Pumice Plain was covered repeatedly by hot pyroclastic flows of ash and pumice in 1980. It is one of the most difficult environments in which life can exist. But if one plant, acting as a pioneer, can gain a foothold, then other organisms may be able to move in to form a thriving community. This community of prairie lupines began as a single plant in 1981. Adapted to dry alpine environments, the lupine is a successful invader of the pumice plain because of tiny bacteria-forming nodules on its roots. The nodules enable it to get nitrogen, the key ingredient missing in ash, directly from the atmosphere. Most of the nitrogen is released into the soil when the plant dies. A single prairie lupine is an island in a sea of pumice, promising food and shelter for insects and seeds sailing in on the wind. Scientists estimate that tons of insects per acre rain down on the ground every year. Not every lupine develops into a full community. There is a high mortality rate on the pumice plain. But a few solitary islands may grow together and provide enough nutrients and shelter for larger animals. Elk and deer were seen in the blast zone within days after the eruption. As they continue to make brief trips into the area, the damage caused to a patch of vegetation by browsing and trampling can be traumatic. Since there is a shortage of water, backcountry lakes are important watering holes for animals passing through. What first appears to be just as barren as the surrounding land, the lakes are actually teeming with life.
Many lakes in the area of Mount St. Helens on the morning of May 18th were still partially covered by ice. And when the volcanic materials began to fall into the water, the effect of that material was very, very slight. That was in strong contrast to the areas all around the lakes that might have the trees completely blown down. The result of this is that a lot of animals, for example, frogs and salamanders, that were just beginning to begin spring courtship, were able to complete courtship in a perfectly normal way. And that set the scene for later in the summer, where you could see thousands of salamander larvae and frog tadpoles in the lake while you were standing in the midst of a forest that had been completely denuded.
Thousands of organisms thrive today just as before the eruption. These are the true oases in a desert of ash and pumice. But at the foot of the volcano, recovery of Spirit Lake lags far behind. filled with shattered pieces of the mountain and charred skeletons of the surrounding forest, Spirit Lake became the volcano's burial waters on May 18th. The full force of the eruption turned Spirit Lake into a seething cauldron as the collapsing north flank and blast plunged into its depths. Water temperatures soared to nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and explosions of steam and ash blasted small craters along the shoreline for weeks after the eruption. So much of the volcano slid into the lake that its water level rose 200 feet in a matter of minutes, and giant waves splashed as high as 400 feet up surrounding ridges, washing soil and trees back into the lake. The hot water and thousands of trees quickly depleted the most important nutrient needed by a healthy lake: oxygen. Without oxygen, a kind of primordial soup formed as bacteria and microscopic organisms attacked the organic debris, releasing foul-smelling gas like a sewage lagoon. No longer the emerald jewel cherished by campers and hikers, Spirit Lake is nevertheless slowly becoming home to insects and wildlife. But how long will it be before the lake is cradled beneath a towering forest and the sound of laughter erupts from its shores again? 50 years? 100 years? No one really knows. Each passing year adds new information for scientists as they piece together the complex pathways to recovery. Visitors continue to come with fascination and awe, some perhaps with fear, as they witness the volcano's power. Whatever sense of dread they may be feeling, the fact that they will be gone by nightfall is reassuring. But beyond Spirit Lake, 55 miles down the Toutle River, thousands of people harbor deep concern. The citizens of Kelso and Longview work and live with Mount St. Helens as a permanent neighbor. Longview is a thriving port of call for cargo ships from around the world. It is a lifeline for agriculture, lumber and paper mills, and minerals that come from as far away as Wyoming. But as they go about their business, both dock and mill workers are keenly aware of the potential danger that lies upstream. Since the eruption, they have struggled to find ways to deal with the legacy left by the volcano at their doorsteps. Tons and tons of sand and silt that threaten to clog the Toutle and Cowlitz rivers, even the mighty Columbia. The responsibility for restoring lost flood protection fell upon the Army Corps of Engineers. 2 days after the eruption, the Corps began emergency operations on the Columbia to clean the blocked shipping channel. 67 river miles from the mountain, mud flows from the Cowlitz River had emptied approximately 45 million cubic yards of material over a 10-mile reach. Pipeline dredging operations continued for 5 months to fully restore the channel. Large pipeline dredges were moved overland through city streets to excavate the mud-clogged Cowlitz River. 37 contracts were let by the Corps for dredging and excavating work. It would take a 1,000-man workforce a period of months to undo what the mud flows had accomplished in 1 day. In June, $173 million for restoration of flood control for the Cowlitz River was appropriated by the United States Congress. Another $45 million was allocated for clearing the Columbia. In a race against coming rains and floods, contractors and Corps personnel maintained 2 10-hour shifts a day. Enormous volumes of volcanic debris were removed, 50 million cubic yards from the Columbia, 70 million from the Cowlitz, and from the Toutle, 30 million. At the peak of work in October, contractors were working 23 pipeline dredges, 52 drag lines, and 250 other pieces of earth-moving machinery. Still, the sediment kept coming. Faced with the endless task of keeping the river channels clear, the Army Corps chose instead to trap the sediment before it can move downstream, behind an earthen dam on the Toutle River. Unlike most dams, this one is not designed to form a reservoir of water. Its main function is to force the river to drop its heavy load of sand and silt before it passes down the spillway. By slowing down the speed of the river, the dam is expected to trap 250 million cubic yards of sediment during the next 50 years. Since Mount St. Helens is still active and likely to cause mud flows again, engineers had to find a way to allow a surge of mud and debris to pass downstream without damaging the dam. Like an overflow safety valve, this shallow channel around the north side of the valley will direct a mud flow around the dam instead of over its top. Here, the power of man is pitted against the volcano. Only time will tell which will lay claim to victory. This chaotic avalanche slid from the volcano 15 miles down the river valley in less than 10 minutes. Torn apart by the avalanche, layer after layer of lava flows, pumice and ash are exposed. Each layer, a permanent record of its turbulent history. For as long as the volcano has been active, the surrounding forest has been ravaged, torn from its roots by a searing blast or suffocated by a blanket of pumice. At the foot of the volcano, hundreds of tree molds stand frozen where an old-growth forest was engulfed by an advancing lava flow nearly 2,000 years ago. As the trees became encased by lava, their trunks burned with the fury of a blazing furnace. With trees afire, their mighty trunks toppled onto the lava, only to be entombed and burned in a final death. But the forest always returns. In yet another paradox of nature, tree molds are the first to harbor new life. The delicate balance that exists between a living forest and the volcano is best revealed by studying a tree's yearly growth rings. Tree rings are nature's timekeeper, recording years in which a tree's growth was limited because of drought or a heavy ashfall from Mount St. Helens. After taking a pencil-thin core from a tree, Ken Cameron measures the width of each annual growth ring, paying close attention to any sequence of rings that occur extremely close together. By comparing cores from hundreds of trees, Cameron can tell whether a sequence of narrow rings was caused by drought or the volcano. By faithfully recording the passage of time, annual rings record years in which tree growth was temporarily slowed or stopped by volcanic activity. As geologists and biologists struggle to decipher the volcano's secrets, visitors are confronted by unfamiliar ground. Unlike those who came before, they are not likely to forget that the breathtaking views and land beneath their feet are gifts from a power that can just as easily take them away. For change is the enduring force here. Only one thing is certain: the volcano will erupt again. The timeless power of the land, that union of what is beautiful with what is terrifying, is insistent here, felt by all who tread beneath the volcano. In all its splendor and horror, Mount St. Helens is a monument to the power of nature, whose breath both consumes and gives life.